techish. Welcome to Rock and Recovery with your host, me, Jay. Today's special guest, author of My Pretty Baby. She is also a radio DJ host in Aspen, Colorado, Wendy. Hi, Wendy.
Well, hi, Jay. Nice to
How
be
are you?
here.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Well, first, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I appreciate that immensely. And, so we talk about addiction and recovery and mental health. And so just bringing a message of hope. And so I'm just going to let you jump right in.
Well, I want to talk about My Pretty Baby, which is my
Absolutely.
memoir that has just come out on November 4th. And actually, I also have the audiobook version that I narrated, as well as the Kindle version. But the book is available wherever you buy your books, indie bookstores, Amazon, Bookshop, Barnes and Noble, all of those places. And I like to say that My Pretty Baby is an autopsy of my family. I peeled apart layer upon layer of intergenerational trauma and childhood trauma, family dysfunction, family secrets, alcoholism, addiction, and I found healing and sobriety through Buddhism, meditation, yoga, the music industry, psychotherapy, and Native American spirituality. And along the way, I had these wonderful and incredible encounters with icons like Ringo Starr and Joni Mitchell and Hunter S. Thompson. And my book is about recovery and resilience and creating your own chosen family when the one that you have is broken.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit more about what you are going through and what inspired you to write My Pretty Baby.
Well, I realized that my family's dysfunction and my family's secrets had written my biography and hence my biology. And I wanted to rewrite my story and choose my own happy ending. And then as I was writing it, I realized more than even my story, it's about how millions of us carry wounds that science now shows rewires our biology and impacts our health and our relationships for life. And so I've realized that my book is not only a guidebook for someone else who may not know where to begin a healing journey or how to begin breaking the cycle in their family. And it is also a call to action so that you and I, Jay, can sit here and have this conversation, these very important conversations without shame, without blame, without guilt, because I feel that we need to shine a light on our family's dysfunction and on addictions and recovery so that we can heal as a society because goodness knows we definitely need it.
What were some of the traumas that you faced as a young lady, and how did you get over that, and what made you change?
Well, it's, taken a lifetime, but when I was 7 years old, my father died. So, of course, that was the very first trauma for a child, especially under the age of 12, to lose a parent is tremendously damaging. And back in the day when my father died, we didn't know how important it was to talk to children about death and what that means or what would happen next or no one even so much as murmured to me that it's very sad that your daddy died, but he was very sick and the doctors did everything they could, and he's very sad that he won't get to see you grow up. I mean, just something to tell a poor little 7-year-old child who doesn't understand what's going on. And even more importantly, no one said to me, but you needn't worry. Your mother is not also going to die, because for a child, you're terrified. What do you mean? I mean, I just lost a parent. So who's to say my other parent won't die as well? No one so much as said any of those things to me. No one comforted me or helped me to express my sadness, my grief. And it wasn't until I was 25 years old that I even began to start to realize that I had unprocessed grief. And then so after my father died, a few years later, my mother um, met the man that would become my stepfather, who was an alcoholic and who was also violent, and
Mm.
who, we would say today he probably had borderline personality or some kind of personality. He had intermittent violent bursts, and you never knew what it was that was going to set him off. So the very first violent episode in my family, I was 9 years old, and it was Christmas Eve. My parents, we were at another family's home, and they were drinking some disgusting concoction called glug. That is a Swedish drink. And he was drunk, and he wound up um, grabbing the Christmas tree and throwing it across the room and threatening to kill my whole family. And I was 9, so my brother was 16, and by then my sister, who was 21, lived somewhere else. And my mother had to calm him down enough that she could call my sister to come and get my brother and I and take us to our aunt and uncle's house, where we spent Christmas Eve and most of the day of Christmas, with, of course, no presents for us, because my aunt and uncle didn't expect us to come to their house. And then it continued like that with my stepdad. You never knew what was going to set him off. So from the time that I was 9 years old, my fight flight was turned on full blast for most of my life, and growing up with him until I left home at 17. And there were other violent acts, and there were lots of threats. But what was really, crazy making is that it wasn't just black and white. It was black and white and gray all over, as one of my chapters of my book is titled, because he could also be a charming person. He could
Uh,
also be generous and funny and adventurous. And he and my mom took me on grand adventures from Illinois to Colorado, out to the Grand Canyon, out to Haight-Ashbury. And he could be a really cool guy, who bought me a go-kart. But then, something would set him off. And again, he's threatening to kill everyone. So it was not a safe home. And when I was 10 years old, I wondered why he drank. Like, I was like, what is it that, it seems like, people shouldn't drink if it makes you do stuff like that. But I wondered what made him drink. So one night when my parents were out and I was having a sleepover, my girlfriends and I got into the liquor cabinet, and we got passed out drunk. And it numbed me to all the fear and the sadness that I had as a child. And then I was like, oh, so now I see it makes you numb to the pain. So I just continued with drinking, and then of course added cigarettes and eventually pot to the mix. And as a teenager, I started doing acid, LSD, and pretty much everything else out there. I did never do heroin. That's about the only thing I didn't do. I tried everything else, White Cross, speed, all of it growing up in Illinois. Um, and then I went on. But I also had a very strong sense of survival. And I knew that I needed to flee my family life. And so I turned 18 on my way to California,
Uh,
where I got myself enrolled in college. And I knew that I wanted a wholesome life. I knew eventually I had to do it. I had to save myself. I had to figure out a way to heal myself. But when I moved to the Bay Area, unfortunately, my girlfriend was with a really rough gang of kids who were also doing horrible drugs like angel dust.
oof.
And there was a lot of that. And um, there was even worse. I mean, there was like my girlfriend's boyfriend was accidentally shot and killed by another friend, and another kid in this gang, robbed a 7-Eleven and shot the 21-year-old kid working there. I mean, it was just horrific. So I had to flee that situation, and then I moved to Northern California, which we used to call behind the redwood curtain, and I started to find some wholesomeness there through my friends in college who had all grown up in California, and they were all like hikers and backpackers. And so they taught me about nature, and they took me hiking and backpacking, and I started to find respite in nature. And then I also found a 3-day Zen meditation, and I realized I didn't even know how to breathe. I had been holding my breath since I was 7 years old, and I didn't even know how to breathe. That was so disconcerting to me. And so I started to heal, but of course, I was still connected to my family. And of course, by then, now I understand, my mother was a codependent on my stepdad, and she basically trained me to look at his good side. She would say, yes, he drinks, but he's still a good person, and just focus on the good side. And so it was kind of, crazy making. But mom, I mean, what is wrong with him that he can tear our Christmas tree down? And so I realized that my mother, she was kind of a victim herself, because she didn't drink. She didn't drink at all, but she what I would learn years later in her 70s, she would finally confide in me, and this was some of the secrets that I had uncovered that I write about, is that when she was a little girl, she had been sexually assaulted by a neighbor on numerous occasions, and she had never told a soul. And as you know, in AA, they always say we're only as sick as our secrets. And my mother carried this horrible secret her whole life. And of course, it affected her relationships with men and her relationships in life, and the choices that she made. So there were, things that I was learning along the way. And then from Northern California, I moved to Los Angeles. And so it was like, taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I would start to get some healing, but then, something might happen and I would take a step backward. And so moving to LA and getting into the music industry in LA, of course, I started snorting cocaine. So let's add
uh,
that to the mix. We've got alcohol and cocaine and nicotine and lots of things to continue to numb the pain that I had from my childhood and from my family, and that I still grappled with. Because throw into that I had these 2 older siblings, one 7 years older and one 12 years older, who never seemed to really care about me, and they did not dote on me like a little, their little sister. They never read to me. They never played games with me. They never hugged me. And I wondered what was wrong with my family, and why did members of my own family not love me? The only one that I really felt loved by was my mother. And I got the message, very young, that in order to have my mom, my stepdad came along with the package. So I kind of, in order to have a relationship with my mom, the only person in my family that loved me, I had to, accept that my dad was part of the package. So it took, years of covering up the pain before I finally um well, the big one was, I was working in the music industry, and I was partying with a band on Sunset Boulevard at Sushi on Sunset, drinking, lots of sake and beers. And my girlfriend was doing costumes for the Thompson twins, and I had helped her do some costume um, work with the Phil Collins band. And I should have just stayed at her hotel at Le Mondrian on Sunset, but instead I attempted to drive back to my apartment on Venice Beach. And I do consider it a miracle that I was pulled over and thrown in jail for a
Mhm.
DUI and given court ordered AA meetings. And so being in the music industry, I don't know if they still do to this day, but back then, because I'm 38 years sober now, thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Um, Back then, you could go to AA meetings that were specifically people in the music industry,
Uh,
musicians and people that worked in the music industry. So I had, a little, this is of course pre-internet. I had a little piece of paper with, listings of AA meetings to go to. And I think I just went to one of the AA meetings that was closest to me in West LA, and I walked into this meeting just shaking in my boots. I didn't know what AA was. I just knew that I was court ordered and I had to go. And this gentleman comes walking up to me with his hand extended out to me, and a completely familiar face, this beautiful smile. And he reaches out to shake my hand and he says, "Hello, my name is Richard." And my head exploded, and I wanted to say, but I didn't say, "Oh my God, your name might be Richard, but it's also Ringo." Ringo
wow.
Starr greeted me at my very first AA meeting, and his lovely wife, Barbara Bach, shook my hand. And of course, it's long known that they have decades of sobriety, so I'm not exposing anyone's sobriety. But I sat there in my very first AA meeting thinking, oh my God, if Ringo Starr can get sober, then certainly I can too. And if sobriety means so much to Ringo that even Ringo Starr will show up at an AA meeting to welcome
Wow.
the newcomers. Like, this is amazing. And so, of course, that motivated me to want to continue going to
Absolutely.
AA meetings and like to see people's commitments to show up. People got to show up. You got to show up for yourself, and you got to show up for other people. And so, I continued to go to AA meetings in Los Angeles, and certainly there were loads of celebrities at the time, um, musicians and actors and the whole, entertainment industry in Hollywood who were finding sobriety. And so that community really helped me to get sober. And at the same time, um, I was still searching, and as they say, it takes a village. I used every person in the village, everything in the village to stay sober and to heal. So about the time I was a couple of months sober and I was working at Geffen Records, and I met someone else in the music industry who was a songwriter, and he invited me to a sweat lodge. And I was like, "Do you mean like a sauna?" And I loved saunas, and
Right.
I loved going to saunas. And he's like, "Well, no, actually, I mean like a Native American sweat lodge, a sacred ceremony." And I had actually got 2 degrees in college, a BA in psychology and a BA in theater, and I minored in Native American studies, but I had only attended prayer circles and powwows, but I had studied a lot about Native Americans, and but really my focus was on genocide and broken treaties and more the history of reservations in the United States. So I asked him if I could go, and he said, of course. So I went to my very first sweat lodge in Los Angeles, believe it or not, in LA. I found a community of people who practiced Native American spirituality with Native elders. They were with trained by Native American elders, and um, that began many years of practicing also Native American spirituality at the same time that I went to AA, and I was also working on a master's degree in clinical psychology at Antioch University, and they required us to also go through psychotherapy. So that's when I started psychotherapy, and I started to understand that my childhood trauma really affected my whole life and my relationships, and um, the feelings of abandonment by not only my father dying, but by my family. And so all of those combined, I was doing, nature and yoga and Native American spirituality and 12-step programs and psychotherapy. So I really did, I asked the whole village to help me out.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, was there one defining moment that was it the arrest and the DUI that was your defining "I'm done with this" moment?
Yes, of course. I would say, I mean, even though I longed to be clean and sober, even though I longed for wholesomeness, and especially being in the music industry, it was easy. I was out, part of my job was going and seeing bands at night. And so it's all around you, it's just
Right.
very difficult not to partake. Um,
It's kind of the
but
culture in that atmosphere.
it's part of the culture, exactly. So even though I really wanted to get sober, um, and then I dated someone who was a musician, and we were snorting cocaine, and cocaine was not as hard to give up because it really made me feel horrible. Um, but I would say, it really was the defining moment, was getting thrown in jail, which I consider a miracle. And thank God I was thrown in jail, because that really did make me wake up. Now, I say that, but then I was sober for a year, and then I went to a BMI ASCAP awards dinner, and there must have been 10 bottles of wine on the table. And I had a year of sobriety under my belt, and I was just like, I just want to be normal like everybody else. I just want to have one glass of wine with dinner, whiny wine.
Yeah.
And, that one glass of wine turned into two or three, and I don't know how many more, but all I remember is waking up the next morning still drunk and
Mm.
terrified that I had driven home again and I might have killed someone. I might have killed myself. And or I
Wow.
could have been thrown in jail for a second DUI. And that definitely, besides getting thrown in jail, that waking up drunk after what I had gone through to get sober and the year of sobriety under my belt, that I had done that again, just that's when I really I that day I went to an AA meeting straight away after work, and then I started being more vocal with friends of mine and letting them know I'm an alcoholic, and I cannot drink. I don't want to drink, and I need to just surround myself with other people who also want to be sober and who want a wholesome lifestyle and want a good community. And, I did, I did get sober again. I started the clock all over again. And then I think I had like another year under my belt, and I wound up going to the very first ever South by Southwest um, music uh, convention in Austin, Texas. It was the very, very first one.
Wow.
And I didn't drink. Everybody, I mean, it was beer, beer, beer everywhere. I didn't drink, but I took a hit off of a joint, which was so dumb because I never liked pot anyway. And I was just like, why did I even do
Why?
that? So I
Yeah.
started over again that day, and I consider March 13th, 1989, my very first um, day of sobriety, and 38 years later I'm still going. But in my book, My Pretty Baby, I outlined that because I want people to see that we are human, we make mistakes, we slip up, and we're vulnerable. And especially when we do have childhood or familia wounding that needs to be healed, and we've got a lot of pain, we need to address that pain. We need to embrace it, and we need to sit with it. And when we deny our pain, and when we try to cover it up with substances or gambling or shopping or whatever it is that we find to cover up the pain, we're only delaying our healing. We have to sit with the pain, as uncomfortable as it may be. We need to address it. And so I hope that My Pretty Baby is a testament to resilience and a testament to the human spirit and that instinct to want to survive. It was a long journey for me to get to the place of healing, and I consider that I'll be doing this for the rest of my life. I'll continue to work on healing and feeling whole and soothing my central nervous system and learning about adverse childhood experiences and having these very wonderful conversations like with you, Jay. My book is a call to action that we need to be able to have these conversations without shame, and that we need to be able to be honest so that we can be real, authentic human beings, and we can embrace the challenges that we've had in life, and the mishaps that we've had in life, and um, all of those things that happened to me. I don't feel ashamed. I'm just I'm grateful because it's brought me to who I am today.
So tell me a little bit more about moving to Colorado. I know it says your life changes when you move to Aspen. How did that change?
Well, so I've, was in the music industry, of course, and I got sober, and um, I got a job as a disc jockey on KSPN FM in Aspen, Colorado, Roaring Fork Radio. And so I moved to Aspen. I thought I had always wanted to be a DJ on the radio. I had worked for many years in the music industry, and I had, a pretty good looking resume. And I thought, being in LA, you're just a small fish in a big pond. And I was just a worker bee. But I thought, wow, in little Aspen, Colorado, maybe I could be a bigger fish. And so I got a job as a DJ on KSPN, and I was sober by then. I had quit smoking by then. And my program manager said to me, well, do you know who the gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson is? And I'm like, yeah, I've read articles of his in Rolling Stone magazine, and wasn't he a character in the Doonesbury cartoons? But I didn't know a whole lot about him. And so my program manager said, well, he'll probably be calling you at 4 in the morning, or, in early in the morning. And sure enough, my first week of being on the air, because as the newbie DJ, I had the ungodly hour of 2 a.m. to 6 a.m.
Oh man.
So So at 4 a.m., I get this call, and I'm like, good morning, Wendy Moore here on KSPN, Roaring Fork Radio. And he says, yeah, can you play me some Warren Zevon, Lawyers, Guns, and Money? And of course, I knew that was Hunter S. Thompson. And I was like, hi, Hunter, sure. And I played Warren Zevon for Hunter for many more nights. And it's funny, in Aspen you have to work about 10 jobs to live there, so I was also waitressing. And like a few weeks later, Hunter comes into the restaurant for lunch where I was also waitressing, and so I introduced myself to him and said, hi, Hunter, not only am I your waitress today, but I'm also the DJ that you call in the middle of the night. And he was like, oh yeah, I really like you. You play good music. And we got to talking. I told him about my experience, in Los Angeles. And by the end of his lunch, he asked me if I wanted a job as his assistant. Well, of course I did, because I was also a fledgling writer. And I thought, who wouldn't want to be an assistant to Hunter S. Thompson? Except that I was totally sober and he decidedly was not,
Far
ever.
from.
And far from it. So, and it was a completely professional relationship. There was never any romantic relationship there, but we were quite an oddly matched
That would be the
couple.
odd couple for
It
real.
was the odd couple because he was drinking and snorting cocaine in front of me and smoking. And I didn't like guns and I didn't know a lot about politics or sports or cars, which were all the things that he liked to talk about. But there was something there, um, that even behind this gruff exterior and this notorious reputation, I maybe it's because of my empathetic nature and because I had gotten sober and because I understand I understand trauma. I saw a tender side of him, and I think that I related to that vulnerable side of him that I think he probably protected with all of his substances. I think I understood him in a deep way. And as I talk about in my book, I talk about hanging out with Joni Mitchell. And the reason that I illustrate these stories about Joni Mitchell and Hunter is because they were so kind to me. They reflected back to me my self worth and that I was lovable. And Hunter appreciated my work ethic. Although at times, sometimes I was like, wait, you're paying me to do this? Like, go with you to Walmart to buy flashlights? I mean, it was there were some things like, okay, but he always reflected back to me that I was a good person. And Joni Mitchell, too, reflected to me that I was lovable and that I had worth. And they reflected this back to me in some cases where my own family did not. So I was working with Hunter and I got another call not in the middle of the night, but around midnight one night from a gentleman with a beautiful Spanish accent. And we got to talking, and I had to keep putting him on hold so I could change the CDs and do the PSAs and the station ID. And I was stacking up. Back then, we had CDs. So I was stacking up my CDs on the counter because I had to write down every song that I played. And running a radio station, I had my current rotation, and then in between I could play out of the library. But there was a certain template that I had to follow for AAA radio, adult alternative radio. And I had to write down every song and then highlight the current rotation to give to my boss so he could check and make sure that I was playing all the songs properly. So I was stacking up CDs and I continued talking with this guy. Well, that guy wound up becoming my husband. So not only, I say that working the crazy shifts on KSPN paid off because not only did I get to be an assistant to Hunter S. Thompson, but I also married the charming Colombian guy that I met on KSPN.
That's an amazing story just in itself, and I'm sure there, with working with Hunter S. Thompson, had to have been remarkably profound. Let's just say that, because I'm sure there's crazy stories and crazy subjects that it's Hunter S. Thompson. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, but besides that, I know you've had a lifelong self-discovery journey, and during that journey, what are some of the things that you picked up on?
Well, I want to say that what was so important to me, I was writing my book, and because I never felt like I belonged, and I didn't feel loved, and I just felt like there were these secrets that I kept digging at and digging at. And, as I told you, I found out about my mother's sexual assault as a child. I wanted to understand what happened to my stepdad, why what happened to him, and I always knew that he had come from a family where his father was also violent and had kicked him out of the home. At 12 years old, he they lived in Wisconsin. They were Swiss immigrants and cheesemakers. And at 12 years old, my stepdad was kicked out of the house by his violent father, and he had to go live on a neighboring farm in the farmer's barn, and he worked for this farmer. And so that was the only story that I really knew um, about my father. I would always ask my mom, what happened to him? Why, you know, um, Oprah Winfrey wrote a book called What Happened to You, instead of, what did you do? More like, what happened to you? And I was just always curious as a child, like, what happened to him? So I knew that, but it wasn't until he died that I contacted a relative in Switzerland, where, like, the real story of trauma came out. That, I think, is the immigrant story. A lot of families in the United States of America are immigrants. They might be second or third or fourth generation immigrants, but they're immigrants. And immigrants had to suck it up, buttercup. They didn't talk about the bad things that they endured. They had to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And there was no processing trauma or grief. And what I learned about my stepdad's family, his grandparents left Switzerland with, they had three children, two older boys and a baby, a little toddler girl. Well, as it turns out, the father decided that they should leave the little girl in Switzerland.
Hmm.
And I can't imagine what that mother must have gone through. Now, I know that women didn't even get the right to vote in Switzerland until 1974. So
Wow.
you've got to know that that was not her choice to leave her baby in Switzerland. And I can only imagine the rage and the grief and the sadness in that family, and how maybe the boys that did get to come to the United States were told, don't you dare whine. At least you didn't get left in Switzerland. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just making it up, but I can imagine. And so that trickled down to my stepfather, that rage and that sadness and that grief that was never processed. And I kept digging and digging, and what I wanted to get back to was, while I was writing my book, I started reading the works of all of the social scientists today that have studied adverse childhood experiences. And for the listeners, you can Google adverse childhood experiences quiz. There are 10 questions that you can answer to find out your score. And the works of Dr. Gabor Mate, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps Score, Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who wrote The Deepest Well. We now know that in the United States, around 61 to 64% of adults have at least one adverse childhood experience, and 1 in 6 adults has 4 or more. And it is found that if you have a score of 6 or more, you could possibly, your life expectancy could be reduced by 20 years if you do not do something to help heal you. Well, the good news is, and my score is 7 out of 10. But the good news is that in My Pretty Baby, what I'm outlining is what I intuitively was drawn to heal. And as it turns out, the research shows that these are the very same things that people can do to heal themselves from adverse childhood experiences. So obviously sobriety, if you know that's on the top of the on the top of the list, is getting sober so you can think straight and begin to heal, but also psychotherapy and nature and um, spirituality, which whatever kind of spirituality you are drawn to. For me, it was Buddhism and Native American studies, but for another person, it could be whatever spirituality they are drawn to. Journaling, writing, but also for psychotherapy, what was really impactful for me was EMDR, eye movement desensitization. And the World Health Organization has deemed that EMDR is one of the best tools that we have for processing trauma. And my therapist also used something called IMTT, which is image transformation therapy. And what EMDR and IMTT help you to do is to process a trauma so that we aren't so easily triggered, because our central nervous systems can get easily triggered because, as Bessel van der Kolk says, this trauma lives in the body. Trauma is not just an external event. It isn't just something that happens and then it goes away. Trauma is what happens inside of us, as Dr. Gabor Mate says in his research. And the stress literally changes the brain and the body, and especially the central nervous system and the immune system. Trauma does not just disappear, it hides in the nervous system. So, anxiety, depression, addictions, rage, chronic diseases are often the body keeping score, as Bessel van der Kolk puts it. So it was so eye-opening to me. I'm writing my book and I'm reading this research, and I'm on every page of the research. And it was so acknowledging to me that, oh, this is all real. I'm not making this up. I'm not hysterical. I'm not I'm not being overly sensitive. My brain, my body were literally changed by growing up in an unsafe home. And it's no wonder that I went to, drugs and alcohol and nicotine to numb the pain until I felt strong enough that I could sit with, acknowledge the pain, and feel the pain. This is all very real. So this research that we now know, that we now understand, it is very real. And we need to keep having these conversations so that we can help other people to heal. So Jay, I'm so grateful to you that you provide this space where we can have this kind of a conversation.
I really appreciate that, and that's all I try to do. And on that, that healing transformation, how long did it take you to write My Pretty Baby?
Well, I started writing chapters in 2015. It was a situation where these stories just sat on my shoulder and they badgered me until they saw themselves on paper. And so I started writing in 2015, just chapters. But in 2019, when my stepfather passed away and my mother had already been gone 11 years before that, is when I finally sat down. And they say the secret to writing is butt in chair. So
Right.
I sat down for 3 days a week for 3 hours at a time for many months until I had what Anne Lamott calls shitty first draft, and I had 100,000 words. And so that was 2019. But then I found this fabulous writing program um, called Write Your Memoir in 6 months with these two women, one of whom had been a therapist for 30 years before she began writing and being an
Wow.
editor. And so thankfully, she was my mentor and my editor and would edit each chapter. And I continued to work with her for another year until I had a draft that I was really proud of. And then I submitted it for publishing to She Writes Press in the fall of 2024 and have spent the past year working with She Writes Press to have it published. So there was, a good 5, 6 years of writing and rewriting and multiple drafts and working with an editor to get it to the place that it is today.
That leads me to my next question. How healing and how much of a transformation and healing journey did writing that take in your life? How much did it help you?
It's 100%. James Pennebaker um, writes books about the healing nature of writing. And even if someone, doesn't necessarily want to get published, just writing in a journal or, just writing poetry or just writing is so healing. But for me, especially, I call it the Gordian knot of my family. It was so complicated and there were so many layers of what I perceived as a human being in this crazy family of mine, and then in my own journey, that putting it down on paper chronologically really helped me to see how my family was. But also, as I was writing, I was able to like what bubbled up for me, like I said, in finding out about my stepdad and my mom's traumas, is a lot of compassion and empathy came up for them, but also a lot of compassion for myself. I was able to embrace myself and say, wow, girl, you've been through a lot and it's amazing you're still alive. I mean, it's amazing that you've survived and you've been 38 years sober and you have been married for 30 years and you raised a remarkable son who is a fabulous human being. And it really is a testament to the resilience. But it feels so clean and healthy, and um, it really is an acknowledgement to my path and to my journey and my tenacity to survive, and a real testament, I think, to the human spirit that I hope another person, like I wrote my book and I wrote my story so that another person will feel less alone in their story. And that's what also drove me and also what is healing for me, because as you know, in AA, being of service is what is so important. And I feel like My Pretty Baby is my ultimate gift of service to sobriety, for another person to read it and to and to know that other people are out there struggling and working hard to just become the best version of themselves that they can be.
Which leads me to my next question. What advice would you have to somebody that's just sober curious or thinking about it or had traumatic experiences and just trying to heal themselves and get out of that? What advice would you have?
Well, number one, get my book and read my book, and I hope it inspires someone to, take some time with sobriety and to learn about who they are and to spend time in nature, and so they can start to listen to their own thoughts. I mean, we live in such a noisy world, and it's only gotten, noisier and noisier, and sometimes it's hard to find your higher power and your higher wisdom. And so I would really encourage people that, you know, you show up for yourself first and foremost. Surround yourself with good people, loving people, kind people, people that bring out the best in you, people that want the best for you. To me, that's the number one thing. And that's why I think 12-step programs really work, is because you're surrounded by like-minded
The
people,
community.
the community who want the same things that you do, the people that just want to be sober so they can think straight and so they can find some quiet and some peace from all the chatter out there, so they can just listen to their own hearts. And that would be my highest recommendation, is to find some quiet time and some quiet place. And if that's in a 12-step meeting, which I hope that it is, especially if what you're looking for is some sobriety, but you could also add to that, I used the whole village. I did it all, and you can too.
And last question, one takeaway that you want everybody to take away, what would that be?
Well, what I want people to know is that even though trauma is universal, so is healing. And telling the truth about what happened isn't about blame or retribution. It's about breaking cycles and healing ourselves and healing society, especially if you have children or if you are a mentor to children. I believe that the best gift that you can give to children is being a cycle breaker in your own family, is being the cycle breaker yourself, and that healing is not only possible, but it is contagious in the best sense of the word.
And why don't you plug yourself one more time? Wendy Correa.
Yeah.
Correa.
Wendy B. Correa. And you can find my book anywhere that you buy books, whether it's an indie bookstore or Amazon, Bookshop, Barnes & Noble, Simon & Schuster. And I narrated my own audiobook, so you can find that exclusively on Audible. And I got to tell you, it's a smoking hot deal right now. But also the ebook is available if you prefer Kindle, or also the paperback is available. And you can also find me, www.Wendy, B as in boy, Correa, Correa. You can also find me on Instagram at Wendy B. Correa, or on Facebook at Wendy Correa.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Your journey and your inspiration is remarkable. Your resiliency, all of that, remarkable. I'm sure you've got some great stories of some great times that were probably not the best of times, but they were still part of your journey.
Oh, I have stories, and we'll talk more, Jay.
And I appreciate all the time you've taken to come on the podcast. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for doing this podcast and creating a space where stories like my pretty baby and other people's stories can be heard by others who need to hear them. That's my highest goal. Thank you.
Thank you also. And that's today's Rock and Recovery. Keep rocking your recovery. Remember, there is hope. Hold on. The pain does end.